Good morning, Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're at the bottom paragraph and page 1476. I have some heart palpitations as we learn this because this is like the last paragraph of this long journey and marathon that began when we started learning it in 2011 approximately, 2012, the 100th anniversary, the centennial from when the Rebbe Rashab began delivering this hemshech, which was 1912. So we started 2012 approximately, a little earlier. And now we are in 2023, the end of 2023. So though, as I've emphasized, the Rebbe Rashab did not actually finish the hemshech, and we'll try to fill in the gaps and the blanks through learning the other Maimorim, the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe's Maimorim, but still, this will be like the last paragraph that he did write. So it's somewhat of it's hard to describe the feeling. I hope you all share it. This is the last paragraph. So let's just go back to where we're up to. We're talking about really 3 levels of yichud, even though he refers to as 2, but then the 2 come together. Yichud Tata, Bitl Hayesh, or Das Tachten. I'll explain in a moment. Or Bitl B'Metzias, or Das Elyon, Yichud Ilah. And these are the themes of Shema Yisrael is Yichud Ilah, Baruch Shem Kved Malchus Ilah Leved Yichud Tata. Or in Shema itself, as he pointed out, as he explained, the first half of Shema, Hashem Elokeinu, is Yichud Ilah, and Hashem Echad is Yichud Tata. These 2 elements of Yichud are critical in understanding the interface between existence and God. So even though we've talked about at length, all of Ayin Beis is that central theme, how do you bring together these 2 opposites? And ultimately is because there is an interface, there's interfaces, which is the whole Seder Ishtalshlus. But in general, every interface has to have something from each side, something that's more divine and something that's more of existence. So in that case, Yichud Ilah represents more the Ohr, as an example he uses the teacher, as he understands the idea for himself. In the case of Lamaila, the dogma is Hashem, godliness, as it shines for itself, just the idea that God is expressing himself. As he says, the Ratzon, the Gili of the Gilead Etzem, which is higher than Kalim and higher than being a Mokar Yesh. And the second, Yichud Tata, so that's having an experience where you're completely absorbed to a higher reality and there's no room for anything else. Everything is nullified in that presence. Yichud Tata, on the other hand, there's an existence, and the existence is aligned with Bitl Hayesh, it's aligned with the divine. And then, obviously, you come to the understanding that Atzmus is higher than both, and he wanted both of those. He wanted that, the 2 types of Ayin. And that's where the Tzimtzum comes into play that actually separates them. But as we've been discussing, and we will discuss much more, the Araved of Yichud is reconnecting and reuniting all these levels. If you recall, when we learned about Hamayrich Be'echad, this goes back quite a while. I'm looking now, I talked about Hamayrich Be'echad, that we should elaborate on Echad. This was a big part of the theme, that how do you elaborate on Echad? Just give you the pages. So it starts approximately 1441, but the truth is, really, that detail goes, just a moment. Actually, it's even earlier, sorry. I think it's earlier, yeah, my mistake. Yeah. It started on page 1418, I think. Yeah. On 1417. We spoke about Ma'ariv Be'echad, but specifically, which is really relevant to what we're learning now, page 1421. We spoke about how you climb the ladder in understanding Yichud. That's Ma'ariv Be'echad. You elaborate on Echad by understanding all the levels of Yichud, starting from the fact that existence is not a self-contained existence. There's a divine energy, God's speech, that vivifies and energizes and creates everything. Then that speech is rooted in thought. The thought is rooted in the faculties. The faculties are in the divine attributes. The divine attributes are rooted in Keser and Ratzon, all the way to higher than Ratzon. All that was elaborated upon. And overall, that's the process of climbing from Yehuda Tata to Yehuda Elah. But of course, the first step is recognizing that life is not about you. You're not the center of existence. We are created, ani nevresi l'shamash eskeni, or ani lo nevresi el l'shamash eskeni. I was created to serve God. That's the first step of redirecting our focus and our consciousness from self-interest to divine interest. And that is the process that we begin the process of climbing. Now, in addition, all this is going to lead to, now once we understand these, once we contemplate and we internalize these levels of yichud, that will then in turn help us refine and educate and train and harness and direct. The animal soul should also learn to love God, even though on its own it begins as its own self-interest driven entity, the animal soul. So with that said, the last piece we learned was that these two levels of ayin, or these two levels of ohr, which originate all the way in the source, but initially they're all encompassed as one, divided into two tracks. Those two tracks are the ohr that is to himself, the ohr that relates to existence, and that he said yeshlemer, one yeshlemer, that is the difference between the Ratzon. There should be ohr that's higher than containers, and the Ratzon there should be ohr that creates containers. And the second yeshlemer is that this is the difference between the hidden worlds and the concealed worlds. The hidden worlds are, which is the two worlds that God creates to govern existence. The hidden worlds is higher than being a yesh, like fish in the sea that are completely absorbed, completely submerged within their source. They're not chutzlatz musei. And then there's Alma Dizgalian that comes out like a dover b'fnei atzmei. God creates something that's unlike himself. So the first Alma Dizgalian is existence, but it's an existence that is very much a similar to it's completely submerged within the divine. Whereas the second level is the level of Alma Dizgalia. And Beis HaMadreges were before the Tzimtzum, all included Eskalus B'Atzmusei, all encompassed without Ischalkus B'chinas Eir Echad HaMiyuchad, and through the Tzimtzum and the Parsa, which concealed that intensity, that's when emerged the two levels. The ayin of the yesh came separate and distant, so it can then it can engage with and relate to existence. Yesh nivra. Now the next paragraph is going to tie this all together and bring it back to Shema Yisrael and Baruch Shem. So it's very clear that the Rebbe Rashab is taking us already back to where this began on page 1466. The thing is, he doesn't continue explaining how it affects the Nefesh Habamis. That we'll look at the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe's mind. But he does bring it back to the two levels of Yichud. That's what we're going to learn now. So the new paragraph is closer to the new paragraph at the bottom of page 1476. And the pages, if you're following along the text, you want to follow along, go to ayinbeis.com. Omnom. Now, what we just said, the Tzimtzum and the Parsa, and we learned about the difference between them earlier in the page. So now, they are the ones that conceal, like a Tzimtzum conceals. A Parsa is a partition, an outside entity that further diffuses the light, allowing it to become a mocker, an energy that will relate to existence. That's from the perspective after the Tzimtzum. Omram ha-Parsa mafsekes, hurak l'gabe nevroim. The partition that divides, or the partition that separates, is only from our perspective. It's only l'gabe nevroim, like he said before on page 1474. Av l'gabe Atzmus ein shum hevdel v'hefsek klal. But from the perspective of Atzmus, in other words, think of it like a one-way mirror. We can't see the other level because it's been concealed. But from the perspective of Atzmus, which is from the inside out or from the top down, he sees it all. So it's like he sees from behind the curtain because the curtain doesn't affect him. Ein shum hevdel v'hefsek klal. There's no separation and no interruption at all. And the Ohr that has become now a mocker, that is going and manifesting through the Tzimtzum and the Parsa to become a source for the very Yesh, for existence, the Ayin Beis, which means, as we said, the second Ayin, not the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, the Ayin of the Yesh, not the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, Hadihu B'chinas Yichud Ba'atzmus Ein Sof, Mamish K'moya Ayin Aleph. It completes absolutely united, seamlessly, with Atzmus Ein Sof, Mamish, literally like this, like the higher level of Ayin. The Ayin that does not relate to existence, from the perspective of God, not from our perspective. Or to go back to the example, from the perspective of the teacher, even when he's applying himself and he's limiting his flow to his student, from his point of view, he has not become less brilliant. Nothing is really concealed by him. The whole idea, even when he's saying the word Aleph, which a little child only sees a letter Aleph, for him, he knows everything that the Aleph contains. He's not conveying it. He's not communicating it. So on this side of the curtain, it's concealed, the student's side. But from the teacher's side, everything is there. Like, just to give an example, the Friedrich Rebbe, the Rebbe was fondly would repeat this many times. That when you teach a child Aleph, first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, a little child, Aleph. That Aleph represents the Aleph of Anochi, Hashem Elokecha, the first letter of the Ten Commandments. The first letter of the Ten Commandments is an Aleph. That Aleph contains the whole word Anochi, is a Rosh Tevis. It's an acronym for Anochi. Anochi contains the whole verse, Anochi Hashem Elokecha Shesichem Eretz Mitzrayim, the first of the Ten Commandments. That first verse contains all the Ten Commandments. All the Ten Commandments contain the entire Torah, the entire written Torah, and contains all the oral Torah. So all in that one Aleph is concentrated, the entire Torah. The student is just hearing an Aleph. As he grows and he continues to expand his containers and matures and grows, Mutfa, Murgish, Muskel, and all the different levels, he will come to understand that in that Aleph lies so much more. But the teacher is teaching it, or if you want to put it this way, Hashem, who said Anochi Hashem Elokecha, for him the Aleph has everything that will come from it, like the concentrated seed. So it's just a difference which perspective. Are you talking about from the perspective of the makabel, the recipient, or are you talking from the perspective of the teacher? In this case, the mashpia. So there's no, so it's mamish k'maya ayin aleph. The ayin aleph, the first ayin is what? It's just divine expression that does not relate to existence. But from the perspective of Atzmus, the second ayin is just like the first ayin. As we learned relatively at length in the last few pages, beginning on page 1474. V'im kain, and that's the case, and based on that, kol mash nesava memenu, everything that was created from him, from Atzmus, hariu kamoi b'Atzilus, it's all like it is in Atzilus, sha'er hu b'chinas yichud, that the Ohr is in a state of utter, of yichud, of unification, the gam hakelim and b'chinas yichud. Yes. And also, one second. Let me finish reading the whole piece, and then I'll stop for questions. One second. Just let me finish. Yes. Utter yichud. Because you're talking about, from this perspective, the idea of Ohrus and Kalim, from the perspective from above, are all part of God's desire of how he wants to manifest. And that's all united. From the perspective of the makabel of Bria, as we'll soon learn, there's a yesh, and it has to relate to the ayin of the yesh. But here it's all the yichud u'kamaymer, iyu v'chayu yichad, the iyu v'gamu yichad. You, God, are one with your energy, with your Ohr, and one with the garmui. Ba'ayim ashen is boil, and look at what we learned earlier, being hakelim she'im b'chinas yichudei elah, about the kelim of Atzilus, that they're yichudei elah. Yichud Atah is in biyah. And Atzilus reigns and radiates Yichudei Elah. Atzilus the protis, which is the microcosm, and of course Atzilus the klolos, which is before the tzimtzum. And we learned already earlier how Atzilus, relative to Biyah, manifests this level of Yichudei Elah. We discussed this earlier already. And obviously there are levels of Yichudei Elah. But Atzilus the protis has in that sense similarities to Atzilus the klolos, which is the Ohr-Ayin self lifnei Tzimtzum. So even though Atzilus is not lifnei Tzimtzum technically, but remember it's lifnei Parsa. And it's so the Tzimtzum diminishes its Atzilus is at the end of the day Atzilus. But it's not, but the Parsa did not, the Parsa that separates Atzilus to make a yesh, they're not happened yet, conceptually. So as such, Atzilus does radiates this level of yichud. So just as it is in Atzilus, Kenu Mamish Bibiyah from the perspective of Atzmus. Not from the perspective of Biyah, of the creation. So this, no difference between Yichud Elah and Yichud Tata. Because the Ayin Beis that relates to the Yesh from the point of view of Atzmus, where the Parsa does not have an effect. The Parsa does not, like the teacher, the partition does not have an effect. So like you said, Kol Mash Nisava, state everything he creates from God's perspective is completely united with him. It's only from our perspective that it's not. Okay. You're going to say more about this, but let me stop here if anybody wants to ask anything.
I hope I'm not making a mistake that you skipped a line.
Which line did I skip?
ואם כן כל מה שניסבו ממנו, הרי הוא גם...
I read the line.
בבחינת ביט, I think you went to Atzilus right away.
Oh, they mean the line afterwards. Okay, let me think. It could be. You're right. I thought you meant the Kol Mash Nesav I skipped. Okay, it could be I skipped that line. So let's read it. Im Kain, Kol Mash Nesav Memenu, everything created men, Ariu Gam Kain, B'chins Bitl V'yichud B'tachlis, is utterly in a state of utter nullification and unification. V'hainu, Sheb'chins Ayin Shala Yesh, the Ayin of the Yesh, V'ayesh Nesava, Harihim Kamoy Ba'atzilus. Okay. You're right. I don't remember reading that line. So let me read it. That the ayin of the yesh and the yesh that's created. So from the point of view of creation, there are two levels. He says, "Harihim kamei b'atzilus sha'er b'chinas yichud, keinu mamish gam b'biyah." Okay. Yes, you're correct. I stand corrected. That's why he says also the kalim, not just the eidus. Because everything is one, the Ayin Shel the Yesh, and the Yesh and the Sava Arihem Kamei Ba'atzilus, that everything is united, completely united. And the Yesh of Bria, the Yesh and the Sava, which is Biyah, is literally like the same level as that Ayin. Ayin Shel the Yesh, Yesh and the Sava Kamei Ba'atzilus. Okay. Any questions on this piece?
It was about your introduction when you introduced today. I had a question about that Ohr that's Megala for the hidden worlds, Bittul B'Metzias. Does that and I think you said there that it was for or before the Tzimtzum. Does that also relate to Atzilus?
I didn't say it was before the Tzimtzum. I said that both levels of Ayin originate before the Tzimtzum, not just that one.
So, the Ohr that's for the hidden worlds, is that referring to also Atzilus, which is Bittul B'Metzias, and the other one is just from Biyah, from Bittul Yesh Milamata, or is it that or the hidden worlds?
The hidden worlds and the revealed worlds are all relative. Sometimes it's Atzilus and Biyah. It could be in Atzilus itself. It could be even higher. The hidden worlds and the revealed worlds are relative to where you're speaking about. Overall, you could say Atzilus is the hidden worlds and Biyah, but he doesn't say that here. Here he's just talking about the hidden worlds, Stimin, which most likely means all the hidden worlds, even the highest levels. And the revealed worlds is once it's revealed. It depends. Atzilus compared to Biyah is hidden. Atzilus compared to higher than Atzilus is revealed. So it depends on which level you're talking. Well, that's what he said. Both levels. Both the revealed and the hidden were both before the Tzimtzum, then they were separated. It's basically two tracks throughout Ishtalshalis. Oris, Kalim, hidden worlds, concealed, hidden worlds, revealed worlds. Okay. Okay, so let's continue. V'oid. So here he now said that even Biyah and the Yesh, from the point of view of Atzmus, is all one, exactly like the Ayin that creates the Yesh. And the Ayin, like the Ayin Aleph, which is the first Ayin that is Megala Atzmus, Ayin of the Yesh Amiti. That's what he said. But now he's going to say even higher. Remember, I explained before that you have the idea of the Ma'arich Be'echad, level by level. So we're traveling upward now. So it says, V'oid l'mayla yeser. And even higher, the Yichud is even higher than what we just said, like in Atzilus. Atzilus is still a level. It has Eris and Kalim. Yes, it's a unified level. Compared to Biyah, it's utterly connected to the divine. It's a divine structure. Biyah is already Yesh. And we've now established from that point of view from above, Biyah is like Atzilus, but even higher than Atzilus. Shakeim Atzilus, v'gama elam is Biyah, hem k'moi b'hashara b'keach, lifnei atzimtzum. That from God's perspective, it's not just that Biyah is as if it's like Atzilus. It's as if it's all still in the way God is allocating resources when he's envisioning existence before the Tzimtzum. So let's go back a moment to the example of the teacher. I'm mostly going to use the example of the architect or the artist. Once you see a building, or once you see a piece of art, okay, once you see a teacher teaching a student, all of that already is after the Tzimtzum. That means the creator has now descended and diminished and concealed the intense energy, be able to allow room for the student, for the piece of art, for the building he's building, the book he's writing, all the similar examples. But from the point of view of the architect or the writer or the composer or the artist or the teacher, how do they see it? So the first thing he says, for them, there's no difference between, from their perspective, between that which they apply. Yes, there's a difference because they have to apply themselves, but fundamentally nothing has changed in the mashpia, or in the creator in this case, because he diminished it and embodied it in a particular amount of words that the recipient can receive. There should be a structure, does not mean that he is diminished. So from his point of view, it's exactly as it is within himself. In this case, what is called first Atzilus, but even deeper. When he first envisioned the art that he's going to create, or when he first envisioned the student he's going to teach, or the building he's going to build, or the book he's going to write, when he envisioned it, is there a difference between the big plot, let's say, how he understands the deeper meaning of his creation, and the way it's going to ultimately communicate it to the individual? No. I use a building, it's the easiest way to explain it. When you see a building go up, let's say a mansion, based on a whole blueprint and a sophisticated, complex plan and strategy. So the builders and the people working on it, they know what they have to do on the ground. They may not even know what the whole building is going to look like. You know, when the electricians come in, they may need to know for the schematics, or when someone's coming to design the kitchen, doesn't necessarily need to know what the living room looks like. That's his job, is to focus on that part of the building. But the architect, or let's call it the builder, the creator, he knows the whole picture. Every detail, every fiber, every detail of existence is all part of that one vision. Doesn't matter if it's a small detail or it's a big detail. And in that context, they're all equal. The fact that from the point of view of the recipient or the actual structure, there are differences. That's only from the perspective from the bottom up, not from the top down. So he's taking us back now all the way into the engine room, not just Atzilus. Atzilus is a unified vision of God's, but it's already manifest in the Shtalshalus. It's after the Tzimtzum. Now we're going before the Tzimtzum, the Ashara B'Keach. If you recall, that's the expression used on Atzilus the Klolos, actually. That's the expression used on the hidden spheres where God is envisioning existence. It's still not the level that's before envisioning, because he's going to bring us back there as well. But if you climb, the next thing is God envisioning existence and allocating resources. That's Shir Asmei B'Keach, means he allocated. Shir Asmei, in potential, he allocated what will be needed in order to create existence. So on that level, he says, that he within himself envisioned or allocated. Shir sometimes can be used, estimated. I don't like to use the word estimate because God doesn't need to estimate. But for example, an architect has to estimate what kind of equipment he'll need. You always see any vendor, anyone that's building something will tell you, here's the labor and here are the resources we need. We need to buy so much and so much paint, and so much wood or stone or other materials. So the Eibishter also made it that way. Shir Asmei B'Keach, when he envisioned existence, he established what resources, B'Keach, in potential within himself, whatever he envisioned what will come and allocated accordingly. It's not actual creation yet, but it's within him as he sees creation. So in this envisioning, there's a root for the kelim and for the elemis. And a root does not mean an actual traceable root. It means it begins there. It all begins. You can't write a book if the author did not envision what he's going to write in the book. It doesn't just happen. The same thing with any creation. Every creation has to begin with the creator envisioning it all. So it's all rooted. And there's Abachal Mitzias. It's all part of God's consciousness. He's consciously envisioning what's going to be. It's not Atzmus yet, because Atzmus doesn't even envision. Atzmus is beyond it all. But here he's talking about the Ohr before the Tzimtzum. That's why that Ohr needs a Tzimtzum, because the way the God envisions it, all of it is equal. There's no distinction between the first Ayin and the second Ayin, between the Ohr that he's revealing to himself and the Ohr that is revealing to the Makabel, to the student, to the recipient. So just as it is in the Shir Asmei B'Keach, from his perspective, Kamoi Kain, Hugam Ba'abiyah La'acharat Tzimtzum. So when he looks at Abiyah, once it's been created, not just when he envisioned it, now that it exists, we only see the building or the art, and we try to figure out from the art how to understand the artist. But God, the artist, sees the art just like he sees in his own essence, in his own consciousness. The way he sees it as he envisioned it. He's not seeing it with limitations because there's no Parsa. He's seeing it exactly as it was envisioned in his core. The last page 1477. It's utterly united within that vision. I know you could ask the question, what does this mean? Does it mean that God cannot see existence the way we see existence from the bottom up? Is that like a limitation? Didn't we learn that God does descend and sees it also from our perspective? So we'll talk about that. That's going to be a big part of our conversation here and in the next, and the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe is my Morim. But the point being is now he is talking from the point of view of Atzmus, Kel Deus Havaya. He's not talking about how God sees it through Yechudi Eloh, Yechudi Tah. He's talking about how it's the source. So then what is the Bria from that point of view? So what's creation then? If he sees it exactly as Ashar B'Keich, where it doesn't exist, meaning there's no Metzias, all it is God's envisioning existence. It's not existence, it's God's envisioning existence. So what's Bria? It says, from that perspective, Bria is only revealing that which God envisions in his core. The Bria hu loshen gilui. Now he translates Bria, sometimes the word creation. Bria comes also from the word gilui, kamei bara oisam. So bara oisam it refers to bara oisam means he revealed it, meaning it was created before, and then he revealed each part when it came its time. It revealed. What does that mean? The kamoishu batzmuse came to gambabis galus, that God wanted to reveal that which is within his hashara b'keach, what he envisioned. So the way it is in Atzmus, that's the way it comes out begili. And from that perspective, from above, everything is encompassed in the core, in his core. Because there, it's not at all capable of talking about something outside of him. You can only talk something outside of him from the perspective, from lower perspectives, not from that higher perspective. The way God sees existence, there is nothing outside of God. So therefore, even the creation, even the art, is also just an extension of the artist. That's what he's saying here. This again needs plenty of explanation, and you don't see this language very often. Some places Chassidus talks about the Rebbe Rashab, but this is classic Rebbe Rashab language, where he's describing what existence looks like from the point of view of God. Now we still have to understand, what about our point of view? How important is that? Because it's not an illusion either, God forbid. Bereshis bara Elokim, God created a world like we learned earlier, and we do mitzvahs in this world, and it matters to the highest levels of Atzmus. It's not a game. It's not just sleight of hand, like, we're on this side of the curtain and playing out a puppet game. It matters. But still, he's introducing how God sees it, the yichud from God's perspective. So let me stop. He's still going to go back now to the mashal of the mashpia mekabel. Yeah.
So by Hashem perspective, it's different between Bobby his galus or Ikemeshehu be'ashor be'koyach. Because the difference is this galus is legabe anivroim, legabe him. It's not this galus more than before.
Well, listen, God did create existence. He did put something in place. You're asking the question, just to clarify, that since it's all like it is in his Ashar B'Kayach, so then what's this galus? It's all Behelim, really. For him, everything's Begali. Even the Ashar B'Kayach is Begali. So what's Bria? On the other hand, if he's talking from our perspective, obviously it's a different picture altogether. There absolutely is a difference between before creation and after creation. So I thought of it when I was reading it. I have to really think about it more. I think I'll speculate if I may. I think what the Rebbe Rashab is saying, that even in the Eibishter, there's a difference because he did want to create. He did make a tzimtzum. To say there's no tzimtzum, the tzimtzum does not conceal him. But to say there's no tzimtzum, that's not correct. A tzimtzum is hein v'resav. It's God's power of restraint. When the teacher is withholding or refraining from saying everything to the student, so for the student, it makes a major difference because the student is only hearing certain words. But even when the teacher doesn't say something, that's also his power. That's also an expression of himself. So I think what he's saying here is that even when the teacher is teaching the student, from the teacher's point of view, everything is there and nothing changed. The difference is, however, if he didn't speak to the student, then it would all be only in the hashara b'keach, so to speak. The fact that he's speaking to the student means it's coming b'his galus. It's nothing new because it's there already, but there is a state where he's being mamshechit. So I think that's what he means to say, that because he said the words before. In other words, he didn't say that the existence after the tzimtzum doesn't exist. He's saying the divine consciousness and existence after the tzimtzum is exactly like the divine consciousness before the tzimtzum. That's the key distinction here. He's not saying it doesn't exist. The teacher is teaching the student. However, from his point of view, whatever is going to the student is exactly as it is within himself. Like he says, there's nothing outside of himself. Now, I know this needs more explanation, but that is what I believe he's saying here. He's not saying that it doesn't exist. He's saying that the existence is exactly the same state as it is in his envisioning it. It's hard for us to imagine, I'll tell you why. Because when we envision something, let's say I envision writing an article today, or doing a video, or giving a class, my envisioning, and once I do it, is not the same thing, because I'm not God. By able to remember, so when he envisions something, he's envisioning it in full intensity, but he actually wants it to exist. So when he, let's say, writes the article, I'm talking about the Eibishter now, not a human being. When he writes the article, for him, whatever's coming out for the Makabel is exactly the same level of yichud, of unity and oneness as it is within him when he's envisioning it. That's what he's saying here. So in other words, if you were able to see existence through God's eyes, you'd see a world, but the world would be exactly as God wants it, which obviously means completely aligned to the plan. We don't see that. That's why we have bchira, free will, that tzimtzum affects us, and we can take the world in a direction completely opposite, God forbid, way God wants it. The difference in what I would want to add, the difference in Atzilus and Ashara B'Keach is an important difference. Atzilus, because he said V'ed Yeser, V'ed L'mayli Yeser. So I would say Atzilus is already God's vision within the structure. It's like he's already made a blueprint and there's God's vision. Shir Asmi B'Keach is God's vision pre-structure. There's no structure yet. There's all it is God's consciousness. Atzilus is there's already a shtalshlus. There's Ak, there's the Kav, there's Ak, Kudim, Nekudim, Vrudim, Tikkun, Atzilus. Just to explain a bit what's the difference between the two. But this is very, very short and dense. And I'm not surprised that Rebbe Rashab, volume 3 in general, at times goes very, very, very concentrated. But especially coming to the end here, we don't know what, where the situation was, why he stopped writing. So it could very well be the Rebbe Rashab, for all we know, was just writing. We sometimes call it, I don't want to call it Roshei Prokim, because it's not Roshei Prokim, it's not just bullet points. It is written out, but it definitely is not elaborating. So we need a lot more elaboration. I want to maybe bring in a Torah Shalom that will help us understand this piece from another place of the Rebbe Rashab. But I think that suffice for now that I think this is what I just said is more or less the explanation. This is very heavy stuff, as you could imagine, because you're talking now of how to look at existence. I want to just give one example to make it a little more palpable and palatable in this case. If you were able to interview the subatomic particles, I know it sounds weird, but I'm using an example. If you were able to speak to the subatomic particles, even to the subatomic, what they call whatever the most, and you had an interview with the subatomic, you had an interview with atoms, with molecules, and then you interviewed a human being, and we both all looking at the same object. Let's take a look at a strand of hair, a follicle, a strand of hair. It could be anything, a drop of water. There will be a very different perspective that a subatomic particle will give you, how it sees water and how we see water. Now, we're not talking about two different realities. We're not talking about two different universes. We're talking about two different perspectives. One is a perspective seeing it like from the inside out, where the very, very core energy that defines existence, matter, is telling you how it looks at, how energy sees matter. And the other is how matter sees energy. So in many ways, when the Yesh looks at the Ayin, it's matter looking at energy. So obviously, it's limited because we have limited perspective. We have sensory tools, our sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. Then we have supersensory tools, and then we can deduce, and we can extrapolate, and we can abstract. I mean, the mind is a powerful mind, but you're going from matter to energy, not the other way around. If you were able to go from energy to matter, how does energy look at matter? You're going to see very different reality. I'm not saying this exact example for this, because obviously we're talking here not just energy, we're talking here the divine. God envisioning it. But it just gives you a certain sense that you could see exactly the same thing. It exists. The water is there. But from that inner place, you see it very differently. You see it as all part of one higher, deeper unity. Like we know today, physics tells us it's one unified universe. We don't see it because we are very limited. We see the table and the chair. We don't see the connection of atoms and subatomic particles. That's all invisible to us. What we see is separate objects. But we've come to learn that that separation is only after the tzimtzum. But before the tzimtzum, they're all really connected. So if you're able to see it from the eyes of the inner forces that shape existence, you'll see oneness. And that's even in physics and plain science, let alone levels that we're talking about, all the way up to Atzilus and all the way to Hashar B'Koyach before the tzimtzum. But it just gives a little sense of how you can see things in two ways. Just on another example, similar example. When you look at a map, or you look at a bunch of circumstances, events, and then give it to the same, let someone look at that same map with a trained eye, you see two different realities. We'll see the dots. The master will see the connection of the dots. You ever speak to a real master, they see a pattern where we don't see patterns. Anyone that's an expert in a particular area will see something that others don't see. They're looking at the same thing because one is looking at it piece by piece and the other sees a pattern emerging or sees a bigger picture. When the Rebbe looked at the Middle East in 1967 or whenever, 1940, whatever it is, he saw a Middle East that we're seeing now. We see it as it develops, a piece here, a piece there, like the story of Purim. It happened over a period of 9 years, 7 to 9 years. So anyone living then saw, okay, Achashverosh happens to throw a party. His wife, Vashti, happens to not want to show up. He happens to kill her. Haman is this. Mordechai happens to hear the plot against the king. We look at it, a bunch of fragments. You look back now, or someone who had the bigger picture would say, 1 second, all these dots connect. There's a pattern. A miracle is about to happen. In other words, there's two ways to look at it. One is you see the details. The other is you see the unity. And then the details are only his galus of what's there in the core. And that's why it says there's nothing is chutz Atzmus. It's all part of that core. Now, the question is how much obviously he's telling this to us for a reason, because we can come to look at things through the eyes of God. But that we'll discuss as we talk about the Yichud. Right now, he's just establishing this perspective. So it's quite fascinating. And it's all coming, as I said, after you explain the difference between the two levels of Ayin, the two Ohr, Yichud Elo, Yichud Dato, he's going back to Keil Deis Havai, that in Atzmus, he's Keil Beis HaDeis. He has both of them, even though they're opposites. Shneim Emes, V'shneim Yechodim Be'ein Sof, as he said on page 1474. So that's what we've learned here now. Any questions? I hope my examples and explanation was helpful. That's the main thing. Pretty mind-blowing, right?
It's pretty cool. I wanted to clarify, when the Abish was looking at the creation from his perspective, now there's two things, well, two parts of the question. The first part of what you just talked about, which is the last thing you read, that as he envisions it in it, but so that's how it comes out, that the way it gets the creation, it looks exactly as he envisioned it. Okay, but the different part is how he sees it from his perspective. Sure, initially he sees it as he envisioned it in all of its how shall I say, all the details of the godliness there, whereas as it comes all the way down, let's say, to our level, it obviously looks a lot different because of the tzimtzum, the concealment. But nevertheless, this is not saying he doesn't see both or everything. This is just saying as it comes out, it's as he envisioned it. But he may also see that. He may also see the reality at the lowest level all at once. You're not saying he can't see it how we see it.
He's not discussing that right now. He's discussing how, so to speak, God sees it on his own. Can he see it through our eyes? Obviously, the answer is yes, but that's not what he's discussing here. Here he's discussing how God sees it through his eyes before the tzimtzum.
Right, but I'm one, and he hasn't said it, but I'm trying to understand the implications of what he said. So imagine I look at my son right now, and he's whatever, almost 24, but I can see my son when I thank God I have my memory. I can remember like pretty much when he came out of his mother, and I can trace in my mind's eye, if you will, I can trace my son all the way through. He's just the same person. Now, I couldn't see my son now as I saw him when he was a baby, but God could because he's outside of time. So I'm imagining he can see things as from the baby's perspective.
But that's not relevant here at all. That's not relevant to this discussion. That's what I'm saying. It's a different discussion. That's not what he's talking about here. He's talking about here that we see it through the tzimtzum, so we see the specifics as he puts it. And the way God sees things, he's not talking about that. That's what I said earlier. It's not what he's discussing.
Okay. Another question is:
will he discuss it? Well, it goes back to the three levels. The Yichud, the Tato, Yichud, the Ilah. I'm thinking that I'll discuss it in the context, because when you have to explain it to the animal soul, it has to be explained on the animal souls. Because at the end of the day, we do have the first two levels of Yichud. Why don't we just talk about this third level, period? We are talking that there's Shema and Baruch Shem, there's a Yesh, and there's Bitla Yesh, and there's Bitla B'Metzias, and then we talk about the Yichud of the two Yichudim that we're talking about now. So clearly this is already after you've gone through the other first two. But I will get to that. I just don't want to confuse matters. Right here he's talking very explicitly what he began on page 1474, Omnam, Mashikosa Kel Deis Havaya, that there's a third level where both levels of Yichud are like one.
Understood. And the last part, it said above, Hooray, Yesham Shosh Akanim Alomos, that it says at the time of Yeshir Asma B'Koach, when he measures it out, sort of, he envisions it. But and maybe that's where the question comes with the Shosh Akanim, we thought as the Halama Atzmus, which is the source of concealment. So is there envisionment in concealment? I'm a little confused about that.
He's not talking about the level of Halama Atzmi here. He's talking about how God is envisioning existence. Ashara B'Koyach is not Halama Atzmi.
But it says Shoresh HaKelim. That Shoresh HaKelim is
I already explained Shoresh HaKelim has many, many meanings. You're talking about the ultimate Shoresh, the power to conceal is where it originates. But Ashara B'Koyach is where the architect, where God is already envisioning and said measuring out existence, creation of existence, and Kelim are the structure of existence.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll stop here. He's now going to go back and explain it back to with the example of Mashpia Makabel that he used, page 1475. And then he's going to go back to Das Alien and Das Tachten, how that comes together, and go back to the two levels of Yichud that the mitzvah of Yichud. Which that's what tells me that this is going to bring us back to page 1466. But going further after Ayin Beis, Rebbe Rashab did not go further, but we have plenty to learn from the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe. So we'll be posting those pages as well on the website. So when we learn it, we could follow the text inside. Yeah.
I have a question about. Okay, go on, Robin.
You go. You go.
Well, we learned today that one of the things that when the Avisha sees it before creation, then it's just his scholars. He sees it exactly how it's going to be revealed. Does that? Two questions come to mind. One, can the Avisha ever be surprised by how things turn out? Or there's no drama there. He knows everything. Like an artist sometimes will say, I envisioned, or a building, or an architect, and he'll come and say once it's actually built, he'll say, wow, even nicer than I thought it would be. Or it didn't come out the way I exactly wanted it. Or there was the process of his scholars itself changed their perspective.
Well,
thing.
Well,
Can that ever happen to Hashem, where it doesn't happen?
it's like asking the question about Ani Hashem Leishanisi. Does God change? Anything change? So, bottom line is, we're not. If you this whole discussion here is about creation process, not avodah. We're not
Right.
talking about a person's avodah and how it affects God, because we do say God gets nachas ruach, pleasure from our mitzvahs, and has pain when we don't do them. We learned earlier that there are levels where it impacts God in a certain way. We have to understand what that means. So that's number one. We're not talking avodah here. We're talking here the process of creation, and the process of our existence is how the creation looks to see appears to the Creator. That's all he's talking about here. Are there surprises? Well, look, the end of Parsha Noach, Parsha Bereshis, we just read, Shabbos, it says, Nechamtim ki asisim, created a world, and now he regrets creating it after he saw how much crime and how corrupt the world became. So you have right there a statement that says he regretted it. Now, of course, everyone asked the question, what does that mean? Didn't God know beforehand? And what do you mean regret? And then the day doesn't destroy the entire world. He does leave Noach. So this is whole other discussion. But it also says the words Vayar, God looked at light and saw it was good. Now, did he not know it was good before he saw it? So there's answers for all these questions. Ultimately, let's put it this way. You can't apply human, anthropomorphic human terms to God. So the whole idea of the word surprise, is applicable to a human being. You write an article, you say it's better than I thought, it's worse than I thought. Create music, other things. With God, you speak that language. The Dibra Torah b'loshen b'nei Adam, the Torah does speak in the language of man. So you could have aspects, like when it says on Shabbos, God rested. We also read in Bereshis, he rested. What does that mean? He got tired after 6 days? And, like somebody worked hard 6 days after rest. Obviously, it doesn't mean that. And yet he uses that word. And when we compare, when we say we should keep Shabbos, for us, it is that way. Shabbos has an element of actual physical menucha, that after 6 days of hard work, you're not working. So this all needs to be explained. That's why you need this to explain what these things mean. So I would not apply the human dimension of change. I have to talk about it more in context of spiritual interactions, and as well as I said, avoid, I'm not even going into right now. That's a whole other discussion altogether. But here you have to remember, this is like I spoke about the subatomic particles. This is the dynamics and the mechanics of existence. How does God see those mechanics? That's all we're talking about here right now. We're not talking about our avodah. We're not talking about what we add or subtract. Earlier, a few pages up, if you remember, he spoke about Shanisi, with whether there is a shinui, does it affect the neshama, does it not affect, does it affect above, does it not affect? And we spoke clearly when he said, he made a very strong qualification in the parentheses on the bottom of page 1471. He said, and we're talking about Navoida, there's a different track. We're talking here, Mitzad, he said, Mitzad Haisavas, but in Haisavas ain't shum shinui v'hispilus klal. That Mitzad creation, there's no change and no hispilus. Hispilus means surprise. So hispilus means any type of emotion, any type of feeling. So bottom line answer is no, there isn't. In the process of creation, in process of avodah, yes. And even in the process of creation, there are levels of the divine that Hashem chose to interact with. So I wouldn't call it a surprise. I would call it an interaction where there is an engagement, and in that sense, there is some relationship, some going back and forth in Malchus and lower levels like that. That's my response. Did you get that?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
I once wrote an article where it was called, Does God Laugh? Because nowhere in the Torah you find God gets angry. You never find him laughing. The only place you find God smiling or laughing is in several places. In one Gemara, where God says, after there was a machlekes between Malchusa da Rakia and I'm sorry, not Malchusa, the Mesifta de Rakia, Mesifta de Kutshabrichu, they were arguing about something. and they went down below to ask Rabbi Ben Nachmani. So it says, he paskin like Mesivta the Rekia, not like Mesivta the Kutchabrichu. Not like God, but like the other Mesivta. So it says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Chayech, he smiled. Omar Natzchuni Bonai Natzchuni. He said, my child has prevailed. Natzchuni, prevailed, my child, prevailed. The child has prevailed, has been victorious over me. So the point I made was that there's ein schayk l'mayla. That's a Gemara. There's no smiles above, because in the structure of existence, existence is very much cause and effect. There's no room for entertainment. There's no room for smiles. There's no room for going outside of the clockwork. But the human being, in this case, when a child of God, a neshama lamata, is mechad something in Torah, you can make God smile, because the Aveda part adds something that regular structure of existence does not have. That's why in the written Torah you're not going to find a smile, but in the Torah Shabbat Peh you'll find it. Even though the truth is in the written Torah you have reich nechayach, nachas ruach lefanei shamati v'nasir eseni, that Hashem has nachas and pleasure. Even now we learn in Noach, the end of Bereshis and Noach motza chen be'enei. God found favor in God's eyes. So you see, again, it's a language of man, but you do see the element of giving God pleasure. So yes, again, needs to be explained, and that's part of this discussion, which we'll talk about. The shinisi, what is shinui, what is not shinui. At the end of the day, we want to bring the lei shinisi of Hashem into a world of shinui down below. So you do need a divine that relates to shinui, but you're ultimately going to draw down from a level of the divine that's beyond shinui. So you're actually going to unite eternity and immutability with immutable, or you can say a immortal world, because the interface ultimately is going to join and fuse immortality and mortality, eternity and the temporal, which we shall discuss more as we go. Okay, a few more thoughts on that. Any other questions now? If not, we'll stop here. I feel like I don't even want to come to the finish line here. I want to go really slowly before we cross the finish line. Yeah. Okay. So we're stopping here.